how fascinating the early years of video games can be. It's like a primordial zoo where various ideas were tried and tested while the pioneers navigated through the barely explored potential of video games. It was a time when many popular genres were born and many of the technologies that are common nowadays were taking their first baby steps. In the 1990s, 3D graphics were a new exciting implementation to video games, which was just as promising as it was treacherous. The implementation wasn't easy, especially given the limited capabilities of the platforms you could play video games on back then. In addition to that, the 3D elements consumed the majority of the time and resources, leaving other aspects of the games less refined. And all of that happened when 2D graphics not only looked very good, but also allowed the devs to focus on refining the game as a whole. For example, Kingsfield was globally released in the same year as Chrono Trigger, and while Chrono Trigger is still considered by many as a timeless classic still playable to this day, especially in its refreshed version, Kingsfield has more historical value rather than gameplay value. The best use of 3D graphics in the early 90s was by thoughtfully mixing it with 2D graphics. Released in 1992, Alone in the Dark seems to be one of the best examples of striking a balance between the new technology and contemporary limitations. It uses a mix of 3D animation with pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed cameras, which allowed for not only a cinematic, slightly movie-like experience with different camera angles, which worked to enhance the survival horror experience, but also to allow the developers to avoid early problems with navigating the 3D environment. Problems that were encountered later by Delphin Software in A Fade to Black, which deserves its own video. But Alone in the Dark did something else as well. It influenced a video game which, along with its successors, formed not only one of the greatest survival horror series ever, but also one of the most successful franchises in gaming history. Yes, I'm talking about Resident Evil. And yes, the title was not a clickbait. Thank you for watching up to this point. Now back to the main topic. Shinji Mikami, in an interview with Le Monde magazine, said this: "When Sony announced the technical specifications and the number of 3D elements that could be displayed on the screen, we were skeptical. I redesigned the game assuming the console would be 50% less powerful than announced. So I opted for a first-person shooter, because that meant we didn't need to display a player character on the screen. We only had to render the environments and enemies in 3D. That's when I played Alone in the Dark, which used fixed backgrounds. It was very interesting because it allowed for greater expressiveness. The next step was to adapt Resident Evil to that model. Without it, Resident Evil would probably have become a first-person shooter. I couldn't find any footage of the actual FPS prototype of Resident Evil, but there's one element that survived and made it to the full version of the game, the door opening animations. As a side note, I want to mention that Resident Evil was supposed to be a spiritual successor to Capcom's Sweet Home. But how is it to play Alone in the Dark? First, we choose between two characters and we listen to their monologues. When it comes to voice acting, the game actually surprised me because every written text has a voice narration.
They are coming! I have freed hellish forces, and now the price must be paid. Their Seto is the prey of evil.
Anyway, after the introduction, we get a brief animation of our protagonist going to the abandoned mansion, entering it and reaching the attic, where they are supposed to check the piano. Of course, we know that it won't end on this, and we will search the whole mansion, moving vertically from its very top level and lower, lower and lower. The journeys of both Emily and Carnby are similar, but their motivations and insights are different. While Carnby is a private detective and goes to the mansion without any crucial intel, Emily is personally tied to the story of the mansion and enters it already having some knowledge of the occultism happening there. Both their 3D models look goofy nowadays, but in 1992 it was quite something. As soon as we finally take control of our protagonist, we immediately notice the tank controls. We move with the use of arrows, up to move forward and the rest to change the direction of moving. And we move like a tank, slow and heavy. There is sprinting, it requires a double click of the up arrow, although it doesn't always work for me, especially when I click too fast. As we move around the room, we obviously notice the famous fixed camera angles, but then we get to interacting with the world. Each time we want to perform a different type of action, we have to open the menu where we can choose between basic actions and items. We can fight, open, search, close or push, and we can only have one action selected at a time. There is only one key used for interactions and it's the spacebar. When to fight, hold the spacebar to anchor yourself to the ground and use the arrow keys to perform attacks. When to open something after the fight, you have to manually switch the action in the menu, then approach the object and hold the spacebar to open or search it. What was really refreshing to me was the old school approach to searching the area and solving the puzzles. There are no Atreus-style hints from the protagonist on what to do. There are no shining indicators for usable objects, and they don't even have any special textures that would indicate their usability. You just have to normally search the room. If something's openable, try opening it. If there's a generic pixelated bookshelf, search it anyway. Similarly with the puzzles. Through trial and error, you have to logically figure out what to do, what objects should be placed where, and so on and so forth. If you're hungry for some proper old-school gaming experience, this is it. You can also push at certain objects. Which ones and why? That's for you to figure out. For example, in the very first room, we can push the wardrobe and the chest to block both the window and the trapdoor. This saves us from having to fight two opponents. And fighting is the worst and most archaic part of the whole game. It's not uncomfortable in a way that serves the survival horror feel. It's simply frustrating. Zombies are slow and have enormous hitboxes, but figuring out what distance is safe and effective to hit them from is very tricky, because once they attack you, it's really difficult to stop their series of attacks. The stun locks are merciless. And then there are the zombie chickens.
What type of dog is this?
Which attack faster and are simply more difficult to defend yourself from. And then there are the controls, which make moving when fighting as easy as eating an uncut watermelon without using your hands, blindfolded, and with a bunch of ants biting your feet. In one moment, we may finally feel like we have figured it out, and there is absolutely no chance of survival for the monster we are fighting. And in the next moment, we're just swinging aimlessly, making a near-perfect impression of blinking from Men in Tights. Thankfully, one of the biggest differences between Alone in the Dark and the survival horrors that came after is the ability to save the game at any moment, which makes the game a lot less rage-inducing. There are also enemies that are way too powerful to be fought like this macabre group of colorful spheres, and you simply have to use your cunning to make your way around them. There is, though, a certain retro charm in the original Alone in the Dark that simply makes me unable to actively discourage retro enthusiasts from playing this game, especially since it's both easily accessible and very cheap. The second and third installments take us to different locations, slightly improve the graphics and add more content, but they also shift from survival horror to more action adventure. A year after the release of Alone in the Dark 3, the world got exposed to the first Resident Evil game, named Biohazard in Japan. With its darker, more horror survival horror, more interesting story and more refined gameplay, Infogrames didn't release the fourth installment in Alone in the Dark series until the year 2001, when the roles became reversed, and now the game was heavily inspired by Resident Evil, which already managed to follow up on its own success with Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil Code Veronica, establishing itself as a major player in the genre. But the competitors don't end there. The year 2001 also saw the release of Silent Hill 2. That's all from me, thank you for watching and hopefully see you in the next video.